Hospitals, they are places of healing, sanctuaries where science and compassion intertwine to protect the most fragile of lives. For parents, the neonatal unit is both a battlefield and a beacon of hope. Each breath their baby takes, a victory. But what if the very hands meant to save them were the same hands ensuring they would never leave? For months, a shadow lurked in the corridors of the Countess of Chester Hospital, a silent predator, a name hidden in the fine print of shift schedules, a presence so unassuming that no one suspected. Until it was too late. Another baby has collapsed. We don't know what's happening. It was happening again. In the darkness of that hospital ward, a deadly game was being played, one where the victims were too small to cry for help, too fragile to fight back. One by one, they fell, collapsing without reason, dying without explanation, and every time, she was there. Her name was whispered in meetings, jotted down in hushed memos. Doctors noticed, but no one dared to say it out loud. After all, could a nurse, young and soft-spoken, truly be responsible? She was kind, she was dedicated, she was trusted. But beneath that gentle smile, behind the kind, reassuring words, lay something much, much darker. And soon, the world would know the truth. This is the horrifying case of Lucy Letby, a monster hiding in scrubs. Hereford, England, a peaceful town, a place where nothing extraordinary ever happens. Within this unassuming home, in the winter of 1990, John and Susan Letby welcomed their only child into the world, a daughter, their everything, their reason for living. But from the moment Lucy Letby took her first breath, her world was carefully controlled. She was raised in a home where rules were strict, emotions were muted, and independence was quietly discouraged. John and Susan adored Lucy, but their love was suffocating. They monitored her every move, shielded her from the world, ensured she never strayed too far. She was never left to fall, but she was never truly free to rise either. A life of quiet obedience, a child who never broke the rules. But what happens when a mind that has never known rejection finally experiences it? In school, Lucy was bright, diligent, well-mannered. Teachers praised her. Parents boasted of her accomplishments. She was perfect, but perfection is often a performance. Friends would later say Lucy was always there, but never quite present. Did she truly feel nothing, or was she simply learning how to mimic emotions she didn't understand? Her classmates described her as quiet, kind, but detached. A person who fit in, but only on the surface. By the time she entered university, Lucy had one goal, one passion: nursing, specifically neonatal care. Some people devote their lives to saving the most fragile among us. Others choose them for very different reasons. Was her passion genuine? Or was this the perfect hunting ground? It was in these sterile hallways, under the dim glow of fluorescent lights, that Lucy found her place in the world. A place where trust was absolute, where no one questioned a nurse's presence at a child's bedside. But soon, that trust would be shattered. Colleagues described Lucy as polite, hardworking, always eager to help. But there were oddities. Did she know what she was becoming? Or had she always been this way? Was it really stress? Or was it something far more chilling? And then the collapses began. And every time she was there. The neonatal unit is a place of delicate miracles, a place where the tiniest fighters take their first breaths, shielded from the world behind glass incubators. But for one family, this sanctuary became a graveyard. The mother, exhausted but relieved, kissed her baby's forehead, unaware it would be the last time she would see him alive. At first, the nurses rushed in. No one knew what was happening. The baby was stable just moments ago, but then his oxygen levels plummeted, his tiny body convulsed, and within minutes, the parents were given the news no mother and father should ever hear. Their baby, Ross, was gone, and in the shadow, she was there. They were just days old, some born premature, fragile, others perfectly healthy. They had names. They had families who dreamed of the lives they would have. But those dreams were stolen. Baby a boy, strong, fighting, just starting to breathe on his own. His parents were ready to take him home in a matter of days. But then, without warning, his oxygen dropped. He turned pale. The crash team was called. It was too late. Baby B, a little girl, the twin sister of baby A, still inside her incubator when she suddenly weakened. Her tiny body struggled to fight, but somehow, she survived. She was one of the lucky ones, but the nightmare wasn't over, because this was only the beginning. At first, doctors were baffled. Neonatal deaths, though tragic, do happen, but this felt different. The collapses were sudden, unexpected, and always seemed to happen during the night shift. One by one, the cases stacked up, and the name that kept reappearing was the last person anyone would suspect. The trusted nurse, the friendly face, the one always there when tragedy struck. For months, doctors searched for a medical explanation. Infections, equipment failure, genetic conditions. Nothing made sense until they noticed the pattern. The babies who died had similar symptoms: sudden oxygen drops, air injected into their bloodstream, unexplained bleeding, and, chillingly, no signs of natural causes. But who would suspect a nurse, a healer, the one trained to care for the most fragile lives? No one knew it yet, but they had a murderer in their midst. And she wasn't finished. The hospital was a place of routine, precision, order. Every day, doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to keep their smallest patients alive. And among them was Lucy Letby. Friendly, hardworking, always willing to help. She blended in. No one suspected a thing until the deaths began. And for some reason, the collapses always seemed to happen when she was on shift. Lucy Letby didn't kill in a fit of rage. She didn't leave bruises, cuts, or visible wounds. Instead, she used her medical knowledge to make it look natural. Air injections into veins, causing fatal embolisms, overfeeding with milk, drowning tiny lungs, tampering with breathing tubes, cutting off oxygen in an instant. No one could see her hands at work. The deaths were quick, silent, and at first, unexplained. And after each tragedy, she played the role of the caring nurse. She would comfort grieving parents, hold their hands, tell them it was just a terrible coincidence. But behind closed doors, she was checking the obituaries, following up on parents, seeing how much pain she had caused. And yet, no one stopped her. At first, the deaths seemed random, a cruel twist of fate, but then patterns began to emerge. The same shifts, the same symptoms, the same nurse present, every time. Doctors raised the alarm. Internal reports were filed, but shockingly, they were ignored. Hospital executives dismissed concerns. They feared bad publicity, reputation damage, a scandal that could cost millions. So instead of protecting babies, they protected themselves. But how many more would die before someone took action? It was one case too many, the final collapse that shattered any lingering doubt. Doctors knew. They could see it now. The deaths weren't random. The hospital's dark secret was finally out, and the smiling nurse who once walked these halls would soon be unmasked as one of Britain's most prolific child murderers. The moment police were called in, they were met with an unthinkable puzzle, a series of unexplained deaths, all within the same hospital walls. One after another, the deaths formed a chilling timeline, and at the center of it all, one nurse, always present. Detectives knew this was no coincidence, but what they didn't know was how deep this horror went. At first, the doctors didn't call the police. They weren't allowed to. Doctors had warned hospital officials for months, but instead of launching an investigation, the hospital protected its reputation. Executives worried that a police investigation would ruin the hospital's image. They feared lawsuits, funding cuts, and scandal. So instead of stopping her, they let her keep working. And because of that decision, more babies would die. When police finally arrested Lucy Letby, they searched her home. It looked ordinary, a cozy, girlish bedroom filled with trinkets, soft toys, and greeting cards. But inside her drawers, detectives found something chilling. This was her confession, hidden in plain sight. There were more notes, disjointed thoughts, obsessive ramblings, and cryptic messages. They think I'm innocent, but I know the truth. I will never be free. Why did this have to happen to me? Was this a guilt-ridden confession? Or the writings of a woman who saw herself as the victim? And then, they discovered something even more disturbing. Detectives traced her internet activity, and what they found was deeply unsettling. She had been searching for the parents of her victims, repeatedly, reading their posts, watching their grief, even checking in on them years later. Was she reliving the pain she caused, feeding off their suffering? It wasn't just murder, it was a twisted game. When detectives confronted her, she didn't cry, she didn't beg, she simply stared. There were no outbursts, no denials, just a woman who seemed eerily detached. What does that smirk reveal? Remorse, indifference, or something much darker? She claimed she didn't know why this was happening, that she was being framed, but detectives weren't convinced. And neither was the jury once the trial began. The evidence was undeniable, the truth inescapable. Lucy Letby was about to face justice. On the morning of the trial, the world watched. Inside, parents clutched tissues. Some couldn't even look at the woman who had destroyed their lives. Then she walked in. No tears, no remorse, just the same vacant stare. The prosecution wasted no time. They knew what they were up against. One by one, they walked the jury through a timeline of horror. Each child, each moment, each suspicious collapse, all leading back to one person. The evidence was overwhelming, but Letby's defense had only one option: deny everything. The defense painted her as a victim, a dedicated nurse scapegoated by a failing hospital. They claimed there was no clear cause of death, that the hospital was looking for someone to blame. Throughout the trial, she barely reacted, until they confronted her with the notes found in her home. At that moment, the silence in the room was deafening. There was no explanation, no excuse, just words that could never be taken back. Then it was the parents' turn. One mother spoke through tears so heavy she could barely form words. She recalled the moment she held her baby, only to be told minutes later that she was gone. A father stared directly at Letby and said, "You stole everything from us. I will never forgive you." Even hardened detectives fought back emotion, but Letby never looked up. And then, the final insult. Lucy Letby refused to come to court for her sentencing. She wouldn't face the families, wouldn't hear their pain, wouldn't listen to the consequences of her actions. For the grieving families, it was another stolen moment, another chance for closure, taken away. And then, justice. Life in prison, without the possibility of parole. Lucy Letby would spend the rest of her life in a prison cell. No freedom, no future, no escape. It would never bring their children back, but it was justice, and justice at last was served. Hospitals are meant to be places of healing, but at the Countess of Chester Hospital, it became a hunting ground. Behind closed doors, warnings were ignored. Doctors raised the alarm again and again, but the hospital silenced them. They saw the patterns, they knew, and yet, Lucy Letby was allowed to continue. One consultant begged for help. He was told to apologize to Letby, and there it was, the truth. The hospital cared more about reputation than saving lives. By the time they acted, it was too late. Was she a monster in disguise? Or something even more terrifying? Someone who appeared normal? Experts struggled to understand. Why? She had no history of abuse, no violent past, No obvious trigger. So why did she kill? Some believe she had a hero complex. Did she hurt these babies just to be the one to save them? To be seen as the devoted nurse? The angel in the NICU? Or was it something darker? Did she enjoy playing God? The truth? We may never fully understand. Across the UK, outrage erupted. How many could have been saved if someone had listened sooner? And from that outrage came change. New laws were proposed, a system to ensure whistleblower doctors could not be silenced. We begged them to listen. No doctor should ever be ignored again. New training, new safeguards, but for many, it was too late. Their children were gone, and no law could bring them back. Lucy Letby will die behind bars, but the scars she left will never fade. For the parents, the doctors, the babies who never got to grow up, the world will never forget. And so we ask, how many warnings will be ignored before it happens again? The case of Lucy Letby is one of the most chilling betrayals of trust in modern history. A nurse, entrusted with life, accused of bringing only death. A smiling face, hiding unspeakable darkness. And now we ask you, do you think Lucy Letby showed signs of being a killer early on? Should the hospital executives be charged too? Could this have been stopped? Should others be held accountable? Or was this an evil no one could have predicted? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, because this story isn't over. Subscribe for more true crime stories.